The Duke of Blackthorne arrived in time to hear his wife scream behind her mother's locked door. He had not heard Eleanor's voice since the night he publicly accused her of adultery and ordered her return to the family she had once begged him never to trust. Marcus drove his shoulder against the door. The old wood splintered around the lock, and the room beyond fell into a terrible silence. Eleanor was pinned against a writing desk by her brother, Sir Julian Ashcombe. One of Julian's hands gripped the back of her neck, while the other forced a blood-stained pen between her fingers. Their mother stood beside the fire, weeping helplessly, her pale face marked by the red shape of a man's hand. A transfer deed lay open beneath Eleanor's trembling wrist. "Release her," Marcus said. His damaged throat reduced the command to a rough whisper, but Julian recoiled as though a pistol had been raised. "Your Grace," he stammered, "you misunderstand. My sister became violent when Mother asked her to sign what she legally owes this family." Marcus's gaze moved across Eleanor's torn sleeve, the bruise darkening beneath her eye, and the thin line of blood at the corner of her mouth. 6 months earlier, he had watched her stand alone in his great hall, while an alleged letter to her lover was read before 40 guests. She had begged him to examine the seal. She had said the paper was wrong, the date impossible, the handwriting copied. Marcus had refused. His pride had demanded a swift judgment, and Julian had offered him one. Now that same man stood over Eleanor with his signet ring pressed into her skin. Marcus crossed the room without another word. Julian stepped between them. "She is no longer your concern. You sent her back to us." The truth struck harder than an accusation. Marcus had sent her back. He had signed an order granting Julian temporary control of the funds intended for Eleanor's separate maintenance. He had believed her brother would protect the family name from further scandal. Instead, Eleanor's gowns had been sold, her maid dismissed, and every letter she wrote intercepted before it reached Blackthorne. Marcus caught Julian by the wrist and twisted until the man released her. Eleanor's knees buckled. Marcus removed his coat, wrapped it around her shaking shoulders, and lifted her into his arms. She stiffened against him. "Do not pretend this is a rescue," she whispered. "You delivered me here." He could offer no defense. "I know." It was the first honest thing he had said to her in half a year. Julian recovered his courage and moved toward the door. "You cannot remove her. She has not signed the deed." Eleanor's fingers suddenly closed around something beneath the edge of the desk. When she opened her fist, a small brass printing plate rested against her bloodied palm. Engraved upon it was the Duke of Blackthorne's private seal, the same seal that had authenticated every letter used to condemn her. Marcus stared at the reversed image carved into the metal. His authentic seal remained inside a locked cabinet at Blackthorne House, yet this plate could reproduce its impression endlessly. "Where did you find that?" he asked. Eleanor looked past him toward her brother, fastened beneath the desk. "Julian pushed me against it, and the loosened nail cut my hand." Julian's face emptied of color. "It is nothing but an ornament." "Then you will not object to my taking it," Eleanor replied. Her voice shook, but her hand closed firmly around the plate. Their mother turned from the fire. "Eleanor, please, if you accuse your brother, he will lose everything." Eleanor's expression changed. Marcus saw the deeper wound there, not merely the violence, but the knowledge that her own mother had watched it happen to protect her son. "He intended to take everything from me first," she said. Julian reached for the deed, but Marcus planted one boot upon it. The heading remained visible between them: Absolute Assignment of the Willowmere Trust. Willowmere was no ordinary inheritance. It contained the cottages and farmland supporting 12 tenant families, and under Eleanor's marriage settlement, its income had been reserved for her independent use. Marcus had authorized Julian to administer the trust, never to transfer its ownership. "This deed bears my signature," Marcus said. "You signed the authorization 3 weeks ago," Julian answered quickly. "Your solicitor sent it." Marcus bent and examined the final page. The signature resembled his own, but the ink had pooled heavily beneath the last letter, a hesitation his hand never made. Beside it was the perfect impression of his ducal seal. Eleanor tightened her grip around the brass plate. "If I had signed before midnight, Julian could have sold Willowmere to Lord Vane before your solicitor discovered the forgery." "Why midnight?" Marcus asked. "Because tomorrow the trust passes to independent trustees, under the clause," my father added, "before our marriage." Eleanor's eyes met his, stripped of every trace of the tenderness she had once shown him. I warned you that Julian wanted control of Willowmere. You called it another lie. A carriage wheel sounded in the courtyard. Julian smiled despite the fear in his eyes. You are too late. Lord Vane has come to witness the transfer. Marcus turned toward the window and saw 3 armed men descending from a black carriage. One carried a magistrate's warrant. Another carried chains. Eleanor looked down at the forged deed beneath Marcus's boot and understood before he did. Julian had never expected merely to force her signature. If she refused, he intended to have her arrested for forging the Duke of Blackthorne's name. The magistrate entered before Marcus could move Eleanor away from the desk. He was a narrow-faced man named Mr. Harcourt, accompanied by 2 constables and Lord Vane, a silver-haired creditor whose smile never reached his eyes. Harcourt unfolded the warrant and glanced first at Eleanor, then at the forged deed beneath Marcus's boot. Lady Blackthorne, you are accused of counterfeiting His Grace's signature and attempting to transfer the Willowmere Trust without lawful authority. Eleanor remained in Marcus's arms, but her spine straightened. On whose testimony? Sir Julian Ashcombe's, supported by Lord Vane. Julian stepped forward, recovering the confidence he had lost when the brass plate appeared. My sister has been desperate since her husband cast her out. She stole the Duke's seal before leaving Blackthorne House and used it to manufacture letters, authorizations, and this deed. When I discovered her deception, she attacked me. Eleanor's mother made a broken sound near the fire. Marcus looked at the bruises on Eleanor's face and then at Julian's unmarked skin. An unusual attack, he said hoarsely, considering she bears every injury. Harcourt shifted uneasily. That may be examined later. The warrant concerns forgery. Then examine the object in her hand. Eleanor opened her fingers, revealing the brass printing plate. Lord Vane's gaze flickered toward Julian for less than a second, but Eleanor saw it. She had spent years studying men who believed women noticed only words. Her late father had taught her to manage the Willowmere accounts when she was 16, placing contracts before her and asking where dishonesty preferred to hide. Not in the large sums, he had said, but in dates, witnesses, and tiny inconsistencies repeated until they appeared ordinary. This plate was nailed beneath Julian's desk, she said. Its edge tore my palm when he forced me against it. Harcourt reached for it, but Eleanor closed her hand. No, once it leaves my possession, it may disappear. You cannot withhold evidence from a magistrate, and you cannot preserve its value without recording where it was found, who handled it, and whether blood from my wound remains along its edge. Harcourt stared at her with reluctant surprise. Lord Vane intervened smoothly. A frightened woman repeats whatever legal phrases she has overheard. It proves nothing. Eleanor looked at the deed, then asked why a transfer supposedly prepared by me names Lord Vane as purchaser, when his presence here was never mentioned in the warrant. Silence settled over the room. Harcourt lowered the paper and examined its wording. Lord Vane's pleasant expression tightened. The proposed purchaser is irrelevant to the act of forgery. No, Eleanor said. He is the person who benefits from it. Marcus set her carefully into a chair, but she caught his sleeve before he could turn away. Do not speak for me. The words were quiet, meant only for him. I will not exchange one man's control for another's, merely because the second now feels guilty. Marcus's jaw tightened, yet he stepped back. Then tell me what you require. It was not forgiveness, it was not trust, but it was the first time he had asked instead of commanded. Eleanor removed his coat from her shoulders and wrapped it more tightly around herself. I require the warrant to be read aloud in full. I require the alleged forged documents to remain in this room, and I require my mother to answer one question before Julian takes her away. Lady Ashcombe began to tremble. Julian moved toward her, but Marcus blocked his path. Eleanor addressed her mother. When was that brass plate placed beneath the desk? I do not know what you mean. The dust around 3 of its nails was thick. The 4th nail was newly driven and had no dust upon it. Someone removed the plate recently, used it, and replaced it badly. Eleanor held up her wounded palm. You heard the hammering. When? Her mother's eyes filled with terror. Julian's voice sharpened. Mother, say nothing. That command accomplished what Eleanor's plea could not. Lady Ashcombe looked at her son, as if seeing him clearly for the first time. Tuesday night, she whispered. After Lord Vane arrived, they remained in this room until nearly dawn. Harcourt turned toward Vane. You told me you had not visited this house for 3 months. The woman is confused. She is grieving, Julian added quickly. Her memory cannot be trusted. Eleanor studied the transfer deed again. Tuesday had been 3 days earlier. The ink upon Marcus's false signature looked fresh, yet the document claimed to have been witnessed in London 10 days before. That contradiction could protect her, but only if the paper survived. Julian suddenly lunged toward the desk and swept the candle from its holder. It struck the deed, scattering burning wax across the pages. Marcus smothered the flames with his bare hand, but Julian seized Eleanor by the hair and dragged her from the chair. A constable caught him before he reached the door. In the struggle, the brass plate fell from Eleanor's hand and slid beneath the cabinet. Lord Vane stepped casually toward it. "Do not move," Eleanor said. Everyone froze at the authority in her voice. She pointed to the lower edge of the cabinet, where a folded scrap of blue paper had been dislodged with the plate. "That is Blackthorne estate paper. I ordered that watermark discontinued 2 years ago, after discovering it absorbed sealing wax unevenly." Marcus stared at her. She had protected his correspondence from forgery long before he accused her of committing it. Eleanor looked at Harcourt. "Retrieve both objects yourself and record exactly where they lie." The magistrate knelt, used his handkerchief to lift the plate, and pulled the blue paper free. It was not blank. 3 lines had been written across it in Julian's hand, listing payments to Lord Vane and a final entry marked B. H. Letters 6 completed, 2 remaining. Harcourt had barely read the words when hoofbeats thundered outside. A servant rushed into the room, breathless and white-faced. "Your Grace, riders have reached Willowmere. They are removing the tenant families under orders bearing your seal." Eleanor turned to Marcus, pain giving way to horror. The forged deed had been a distraction. While everyone fought over ownership of Willowmere, Julian's men had already begun clearing the land. Eleanor was on her feet before Marcus could stop her. Pain tore through her ribs, but the thought of 12 families being driven into the road silenced every protest her body made. "How many riders?" she asked the servant. 8, my lady. Perhaps 10. Mr. Caleb Finch tried to bar the eastern gate, but they struck him down. Caleb had served as Willowmere's bailiff since Eleanor was 17. He knew every boundary stone, every drainage ditch, and every family whose rent depended upon the harvest. If Julian's men had attacked him, this was no lawful transfer. It was an occupation. Marcus turned to Harcourt. "Detain Julian and Vane." The magistrate hesitated. "The warrant before me concerns Lady Blackthorne. I have no authority to imprison gentlemen, merely because a scrap of paper lists their names." Julian smiled. "Then execute the warrant you came to serve." Harcourt looked between the bruised woman and the Duke whose forged signature lay before him. "Until the documents are examined, Lady Blackthorne must remain under supervision." Eleanor stepped toward him. "Then, supervise me at Willowmere. If I forged the eviction orders, you will find proof there. If I did not, every minute we remain in this room gives the true forger time to destroy it." Harcourt could not deny the logic without exposing his partiality. He ordered one constable to remain with Julian, while the second accompanied them. Lord Vane objected that the roads were unsafe after dark, but Eleanor caught the faint relief in his voice. He did not fear the road, he feared what might still be found at Willowmere. Marcus's carriage stood ready outside. When he offered Eleanor his hand, she passed him without taking it. Her mother called her name from the doorway. Eleanor stopped, but did not turn. "I am sorry," Lady Ashcombe whispered. "I thought if you signed, Julian would stop." Eleanor closed her eyes. "You thought my surrender would purchase his mercy. It only taught him that hurting me worked." She entered the carriage alone. Marcus followed, sitting opposite, rather than beside her. For several miles, neither spoke. The wheels struck ruts as the horses raced through the gathering dusk. Eleanor pressed a folded handkerchief to her bleeding palm. Marcus watched the red stain spread across the cloth. "Why did you come tonight?" she asked. His damaged voice emerged slowly. "My solicitor found that 3 payments from your maintenance account had been redirected to Vane. I came to ask Julian for the ledgers. You came for the money." At first, Marcus looked toward the dark road beyond the window. "Then your former maid found me at the inn. She said Julian had locked you inside the house after you refused to sign." Eleanor remembered Mary being dismissed 2 weeks after her arrival. The girl had promised to seek help, but Eleanor had stopped expecting anyone to believe her. Mary risked her position to reach you. She has no position. Julian told every household in the county that she was a thief. Marcus's hand closed over his knee. Another accusation I accepted without asking who benefited from it. Eleanor gave him no comfort. Blackthorne's power had made his indifference more dangerous than Julian's cruelty. When we reach Willowmere, you will not claim the estate in my name, she said. You will state that your authorization to Julian is disputed and demand that all removals cease until the trustees arrive. Agreed. You will also tell Harcourt that I warned you about the forged letters 6 months ago. Marcus met her eyes. Before every person present, the simplicity of his answer unsettled her more than resistance would have. The carriage rounded the final bend. Flames burned ahead, not from cottages, as Eleanor first feared, but from a bonfire in the central yard. Furniture, bedding, and children's wooden stools had been piled together, while armed riders forced families toward waiting wagons. Caleb Finch lay near the well, with blood covering one side of his face. Eleanor opened the carriage door before it stopped. She ran to him, ignoring Marcus's command to wait. Caleb stirred when she knelt beside him. "My lady," he murmured, "they have an order with your signature." "Mine?" Caleb pulled a crumpled notice from inside his coat. Eleanor read the first lines. The order claimed she had surrendered Willowmere voluntarily and authorized the immediate removal of every tenant owing rent. Her signature appeared at the bottom. Unlike Marcus's false signature, this imitation was poor. The forgers had never seen her write freely. They had copied the stiff hand from letters she composed while Julian watched. "Who delivered this?" she asked. Caleb pointed weakly toward the granary. A broad man in a riding coat stood on its steps, overseeing the removal. Eleanor recognized Mr. Pritchard, Lord Vane's private agent. He raised his voice when he saw her. "Lady Blackthorne is under arrest for fraud. Any command she gives is invalid." The frightened tenants drew away from Eleanor. Marcus stepped from the carriage, but she lifted one hand, reminding him of his promise not to speak for her. She climbed onto the well platform so everyone could see her. "This order is false," she announced. "Under the Willowmere leases, no tenant may be removed for unpaid rent until 30 days after a written demand is entered in the estate rent book." "Mr. Finch, where is that book?" Caleb's expression changed. "In the estate office, locked inside the iron chest." Pritchard smiled. The chest was empty. Eleanor looked toward the office window. "Then you opened the wrong compartment." Her father had commissioned the chest with a shallow false base after a former steward attempted to alter the accounts. Only Eleanor and Caleb knew how to release it. She crossed the yard with Harcourt, Marcus, and the tenants following. The office had been ransacked. Papers covered the floor, drawers hung open, and the iron chest stood against the wall, with its key still in the lock. Eleanor pressed 2 brass studs beneath the rim. The false base rose, revealing the leather-bound rent book untouched. A murmur passed through the tenants. She opened it upon the desk. Every family's rent was paid through Michaelmas. Beside each entry stood Caleb's signature and Eleanor's private mark, a small wheat sheaf drawn in brown ink. It was a victory, but it lasted only seconds. Harcourt turned to the final page and frowned. The last 6 entries had been cut from the binding with a sharp blade. Those pages covered the exact weeks when Vane's payments began. Eleanor examined the severed threads. A faint smear of violet wax clung to one of them, carrying the scent of cloves. She had smelled that same wax on the false adultery letters Marcus received. Across the room, Lord Vane quietly removed a violet-sealed packet from his pocket and slipped it behind a stack of invoices. Marcus saw the movement. Before he could reach the packet, Pritchard kicked over the lantern. Darkness swallowed the office. A window shattered. Boots pounded across the floor, and someone tore the rent book from Eleanor's hands. When Marcus relit the lantern, Pritchard was gone. The packet had vanished, and the open window framed only an empty field. But the thief had left the rent book behind. Eleanor lifted it from the floor and found a new message carved through its leather cover. "Sign Willowmere, away by dawn, or your mother hangs for the forgeries." Eleanor read the threat twice before allowing anyone else to see it. The letters had been cut deeply into the leather, their edges pale and raw. Whoever carved them had known she would find the rent book, known she would recognize the forged entries, and known precisely which fear might force her to surrender. Her mother was no innocent, but Eleanor could not leave her to Julian's punishment. "We return to Ashcombe House," Marcus said. "If Julian has touched her, that is what they expect," Eleanor interrupted. "They want us racing back, while Pritchard clears Willowmere, and Vane destroys whatever remains here." Harcourt studied the carved message. "Your mother was under a constable's protection when we departed." "A constable Julian has known since childhood," Eleanor replied. "If my mother is truly in danger, we must confirm it without abandoning the estate." She turned to Caleb, who had been helped into a chair. "Can Thomas Bell reach Ashcombe House by the river path?" Caleb nodded. Thomas was a tenant's 17-year-old son, small enough to move unseen through the woods, and loyal because Eleanor had once intervened when Julian tried to press him into unpaid labor. Eleanor wrote a short message using a code she had taught the tenant children during harvest games. Count every third word, ignore the rest. If Thomas was stopped, the page would appear to contain nothing more than instructions for repairing a fence. "Tell him not to enter the house," she said. "He is only to watch the north windows and return with the color of the curtain displayed in my mother's room. Blue means she is safe. White means danger. No curtain means Julian has taken her." Marcus observed her preparations in silence. 6 months earlier, he had dismissed such careful arrangements as Eleanor's obsession with household details. Now, those same details provided a network more reliable than his authority. Harcourt posted men at the road, while the tenants carried their belongings back into their cottages. Eleanor ordered the bonfire extinguished and organized a search of the estate office. A child's cradle had been damaged, 2 cupboards emptied, and the strongbox forced open. Yet the intruders had ignored the sacks of rent receipts stored near the chimney. That made no sense if their purpose was simply to erase the accounts. She untied the first sack and examined its contents. Each receipt carried the tenant's name, payment, date, and a matching number corresponding to the rent book. "They stole only 6 pages," she said. "Why those weeks?" Caleb rubbed the blood from his temple. "Those were the weeks you ordered repairs to the western drainage channel." Eleanor remembered immediately. The channel protected Willowmere's lowest fields from flooding. She had approved the work after discovering that spring water was weakening the embankment. Julian had later cancelled the repairs, claiming the trust could not afford them. "Bring me the drainage invoices." Caleb looked toward the overturned shelves. "Pritchard took them last month," said Sir Julian. "Required every account at Ashcombe House." Lord Vane folded his arms. "This discussion concerns farming expenses, not forged letters." "It concerns money," Eleanor replied. "The repair fund contained £1,200. If Julian removed it, he needed the account pages destroyed before the independent trustees examined them tomorrow." Harcourt glanced toward Vane. "That provides a motive for the forced transfer." Vane laughed softly. "Lady Blackthorne invents theft to conceal her own fraud. She managed Willowmere before her separation. If funds are missing, she is the person most likely to have taken them." The accusation spread quickly through the room. Several tenants who had welcomed Eleanor moments earlier now exchanged uncertain looks. Marcus stepped forward, anger tightening his features, but Eleanor faced Vane herself. "Then we shall calculate what the repairs should have cost." She asked for the original survey maps, measured the length of the drainage channel, and compared the stone, timber, and labor estimates with prices recorded in older estate books. Her father had taught her never to trust a final total without rebuilding it from its smallest parts. Within an hour, she had established that the repair required no more than £700. Julian had withdrawn £1,200. £500 remained, unaccounted for. "A clever performance," Vane said, "but numbers written by a disgraced wife prove nothing, not by themselves." Eleanor opened the sack of receipts again. One slip had been folded around a small iron token, stamped with the mark of the county quarry. The token was issued whenever stone was purchased and surrendered only after delivery. "Caleb, did the stone ever arrive?" "No, my lady. Sir Julian cancelled it 2 days before delivery." Eleanor held up the token. "Then the quarry returned the payment to whoever presented this." On its reverse, someone had scratched the initials J.A. Harcourt took possession of it and recorded the discovery. For the first time that night, the evidence did not depend upon Eleanor's word. The token had been stored among receipts in Caleb's locked office, and the quarry clerk could identify the person who collected the refund. Vane's expression remained calm, but a pulse began beating at his temple. Marcus looked at Eleanor's calculations, spread across the desk. "You used to send me reports on every repair." "I did. Julian told me they were attempts to conceal your spending. And you stopped opening them." Marcus's gaze dropped. He remembered returning the last packet unopened, its blue paper still sealed, with a message instructing Eleanor to leave estate affairs to men who understood them. Within a week, Julian had gained full control. The consequence of that contempt now surrounded him. Frightened families, missing money, forged orders, and a wife whose bruises had been delivered by the authority Marcus gave her brother. A commotion sounded outside. The constable dragged Pritchard into the office, mud covering his boots. He had been caught near the western boundary, carrying a satchel of documents. Eleanor searched the contents under Harcourt's supervision. Inside were the missing drainage invoices, 6 rent book pages, and a letter directing Julian to blame Eleanor for the stolen fund. At the bottom appeared Lord Vane's signature. Vane immediately pointed at Marcus. "That letter was found by the Duke's men. His wife prepared the entire scene, and he allows it because he regrets casting her out." Harcourt hesitated again. Marcus could have ordered the accusation silenced, but instead he removed a small key from his watch chain. "At Blackthorne House," he said, "there is a locked cabinet containing every letter used to condemn Eleanor. Harcourt will open it himself. He will compare the paper, wax, handwriting, and seal with what was found tonight." Eleanor studied him carefully. This was the investigation she had begged him to conduct before he destroyed her name. "And if that cabinet proves the letters false?" she asked. Marcus looked directly at the woman he had refused to believe. "Then I will state publicly that I knew you challenged the evidence, that I chose not to examine it, and that every crime committed afterward was enabled by my choice." Before Eleanor could answer, Thomas Bell burst through the doorway, gasping for breath. In his fist was a strip of white curtain stained with blood. "Lady Ashcombe is gone," he said. "Sir Julian escaped the constable and took her. He left word that she will be brought to Blackthorne House before dawn, where he intends to burn the cabinet and every letter inside it." Marcus ordered 2 riders to remain at Willowmere while the carriage raced toward Blackthorne House. Harcourt carried the brass plate, quarry token, and recovered papers in a locked dispatch box resting across his knees. Eleanor kept the rent book against her chest. No one spoke of what might already be burning. The evidence inside Marcus's cabinet could clear her name, but Lady Ashcombe's life stood between them and the truth. When Blackthorne's towers appeared beyond the trees, an orange glow flickered behind the eastern windows. Smoke curled above the roof. Marcus leaned from the carriage and shouted for the driver to increase speed, but his ruined voice broke under the strain. Eleanor placed 2 fingers against his sleeve. "The archive room has stone walls and an iron door. If Julian set the fire inside it, the flames will consume the contents before spreading. If he set it elsewhere, he wants us to believe the cabinet is his target." Marcus turned toward her. "Then what is his true target?" "Your signature." They entered through the main courtyard to find servants gathered beneath the portico. Smoke poured from the old music room, not the archive. At the top of the steps stood Julian, with one arm around his mother's shoulders and a pistol pressed beneath her ribs. Lord Vane's remaining men controlled the entrance. On a table before Julian lay 3 documents, a bottle of ink, and Marcus's silver ducal seal. "You arrived more quickly than expected," Julian called. "Fortunately, the fire has encouraged the household to remain outside." Lady Ashcombe's face was bloodless. A cut marked her temple, but she was alive. "Let her go," Eleanor said. Julian smiled at the bruises he had given his sister. "Sign the transfer, and she walks free. You know the Willowmere trustees assume control at dawn. My signature alone will not defeat the settlement. That is why His Grace must sign as well." Marcus stepped forward, but 2 pistols turned toward Eleanor. Julian pointed to the papers. The first was a declaration affirming Eleanor's adultery. The second recognized Julian's authority over her separate maintenance. The third transferred Willowmere's private lands to a company controlled by Vane. "If the Duke confirms his original judgment," Julian said, "your objections become the desperate inventions of a guilty wife." Eleanor looked at Marcus. "Original judgment?" Julian laughed. Has he not told you what he signed on the night he expelled you? Marcus's silence answered before any words could. Julian produced a folded parchment bearing the authentic ducal seal. It was not the temporary administrative order Marcus had described. It was a broad power of attorney, allowing Julian to manage Eleanor's maintenance, correspondence, servants, legal representation, and property disputes during the separation. Marcus had granted him almost complete control over her life. You told me it concerned the household allowance, Eleanor said. Marcus's face hardened with shame. I did not read the final clauses. You signed without reading. I wanted the scandal ended before Parliament assembled. Julian promised silence if I gave him authority to keep you away from London. The truth hollowed something inside her. Marcus had possessed one last opportunity to investigate the letters. Instead, he had traded her freedom for political convenience. Every intercepted message, stolen payment, dismissed servant, and blow beneath her mother's roof had been made possible by that signature. Julian had not stolen the Duke's authority. Marcus had handed it to him. You could have asked me, Eleanor whispered. I had already decided what your answer would be. Marcus did not look away. Yes, Julian tapped the new declaration impatiently. A touching confession. Sign now, or mother pays for Eleanor's stubbornness. Lady Ashcombe began to cry. Do not do it, Ellie. It was the first time she had opposed her son. Julian pressed the pistol harder against her side. Eleanor moved toward the table. Marcus caught her wrist. She flinched, and he released her immediately. If you sign Willowmere away, he said, Vane will evict every family before the trustees can intervene. If I refuse, Julian may kill her. He may kill her after you sign. Julian cocked the pistol. The small metallic sound brought every servant to silence. Eleanor studied the documents instead of the weapon. All three had been prepared on blue Blackthorne paper, but the declaration of adultery bore no date. Julian needed Marcus to write it, because a dated declaration could be compared with the earlier forged letters. The blank date allowed Vane to place it wherever the false timeline required. I will sign, Marcus said. Eleanor turned sharply. No, not the documents he prepared. Marcus faced the servants gathered in the courtyard, Harcourt beside the carriage, and every armed man watching from the steps. I will sign a confession of my own. Julian's expression changed. Marcus took a blank sheet from Harcourt's case. In slow, deliberate lines, he wrote that Eleanor had challenged the adultery letters before her expulsion, that he refused to inspect their paper, seal, and dates, that he transferred authority to Julian for political convenience, and that any action taken under that authority must now be considered disputed. He signed and handed the statement to Harcourt. Witness it. Harcourt added his name. Marcus then addressed his servants. His voice was barely more than a rasp, forcing the courtyard to become still enough to hear every word. Lady Blackthorne was denied the chance to defend herself. I denied it. No servant of this house will obey Julian Ashcombe again. It was a costly truth, but it did not free Lady Ashcombe. Julian dragged her backward toward the entrance. Then you have chosen Eleanor's tenants over her mother. Eleanor saw her mother's eyes close in terror. She also noticed the pistol's hammer. It was cocked, yet Julian's forefinger rested outside the trigger guard. He did not intend to shoot, not before he obtained the signatures. You cannot kill her, Eleanor said. Her name appears as witness on 2 of the false letters. Dead, she becomes suspicious. Alive and frightened, she can be forced to confirm your story. Julian's grip tightened. That tiny reaction told Harcourt she was right. Marcus lunged. Lady Ashcombe dropped to the ground, as Eleanor had silently signalled, and the pistol discharged into the stone above them. Servants rushed the steps. Julian fled through the entrance while Vane's men scattered. Eleanor pulled her mother clear, as Marcus pursued Julian into the smoke-filled house. They found him inside the archive room, forcing the iron cabinet open with a crowbar. Marcus struck him once and pinned him against the wall. The cabinet remained locked, its contents safe. Yet Julian began laughing. You still believe this concerns letters? He gasped. Vane never needed Willowmere for its rent. He needed the western field empty. Eleanor remembered the cancelled drainage repairs, the weakened embankment, and the riders driving tenants from the lowest cottages. She seized Julian's collar. What is beneath that field? His smile widened. Ask your dead father why he paid to hide it. A distant explosion shook the windows. Glass shattered across the archive floor. From the direction of Willowmere, a red light rose into the sky. Caleb stumbled into the doorway moments later, having ridden after them despite his injury. "The western embankment has been blasted open," he cried. "The river is flooding the cottages, and Vane's men are digging beneath the chapel." Eleanor reached Willowmere to find the western sky glowing above black water. The shattered embankment had released the river across the lowest fields, turning lanes into violent streams and trapping 3 families inside their cottages. Men shouted from the darkness, while horses struggled through rising water. The chapel stood on the highest ground, its door torn from the hinges and lanterns moving beneath its floor. Vane's men were still digging. Eleanor slid from the carriage before it stopped. Marcus followed, but she pointed toward the cottages. "Take every able servant and form a rope line from the eastern oak. Children first, then the elderly. Do not send horses into the deepest channel. The current will break their legs." Marcus obeyed without argument. 6 months earlier, he would have taken command, simply because he was a duke. Tonight, he recognized that Eleanor knew this land better than anyone alive. She sent Caleb to open the old mill sluice, which could divert part of the flood into an unused pasture. Thomas Bell gathered the tenant boys to carry lanterns along the safest path. Eleanor herself ran toward the chapel with Harcourt and 1 constable. Pritchard stood inside, beside a newly opened hole in the stone floor. 2 men were lowering a chain into it, while Lord Vane directed them from the altar steps. "You should have signed," Vane said when Eleanor entered. "Then the tenants would have been removed before the embankment failed, and no one need have been injured. The embankment did not fail. You blasted it." A serious accusation from a woman whose own accounts show that repairs were cancelled. His trap was now clear. Julian had stolen the repair fund and prevented the work. Vane had destroyed the weakened bank, so the disaster could be blamed on Eleanor's management. By dawn, Willowmere would appear ruined, its tenants displaced, and its trust unable to meet its obligations. Vane could then purchase the flooded estate for a fraction of its value. "What are you seeking beneath the chapel?" Eleanor asked. Vane's composure slipped. "An object that belongs to me." One of his men called from the pit. The chain tightened, and an iron chest emerged through the broken floor. It was narrow, blackened with age, and marked with Eleanor's father's initials. She remembered seeing the same initials on an entry in his private index. W.A. Chapel Foundation. Release only upon independent succession. Her father had hidden something intended to be opened on the very morning the trustees assumed control. Vane drew a pistol. "Stand aside." Harcourt raised his warrant. "Lord Vane, that chest is located upon trust property and must remain where it was found. Your warrant concerns Lady Blackthorne. My authority also extends to an armed breach of the peace, the destruction of an embankment, and attempted theft, witnessed with my own eyes." Vane fired. The ball struck the stone above Harcourt's shoulder, filling the chapel with dust. Pritchard rushed the constable while the other men dragged the chest toward the rear door. Eleanor seized a fallen lantern and hurled it into their path. Oil spread across the flagstones, forcing them back from the flames. She caught the chain around the chest and pulled, but Pritchard struck her wounded hand. Pain shot to her shoulder. Before he could strike again, Caleb entered through the side door and drove him away with a wooden staff. "The chest, my lady!" he shouted. Together they pulled it behind the stone baptismal font. Vane aimed at Eleanor, but Marcus appeared in the doorway, soaked to the waist from the rescue. He placed himself between the pistol and his wife. "Put it down." Vane's lip curled. "You have no authority left here. You signed it away to Julian." He produced a second document bearing Marcus's authentic signature, the power of attorney. Attached beneath it was a clause Marcus had never seen, granting Julian authority to borrow against the Blackthorne private estates if Eleanor's separation created financial losses. The clause had been added before Marcus signed, hidden beneath a folded page, yet his signature crossed the fastening ribbon, making denial difficult. Using that authority, Julian had pledged not only Willowmere, but 3 Blackthorne farms as security for loans from Vane. "The debts mature at dawn," Vane said. "When Willowmere is declared insolvent, I claim the Blackthorne farms as well." Marcus stared at the paper. His political haste had not merely endangered Eleanor's inheritance. It had placed hundreds of his own tenants beneath Vane's control. "I signed the ribbon," he said, "but not that clause." Prove it. After the estates are mine. A scream rose outside. One of the cottages had begun to collapse. Eleanor looked from the chest to the doorway. If she remained, she might preserve the object her father had hidden. If she left, a family could drown. Vane watched her recognize the choice. There is the difference between us, he said softly. You will always choose people over property. That is why men like me eventually own both. Eleanor released the chain. Caleb, remain with Harcourt. Marcus, come with me. She ran into the flood. The collapsed cottage belonged to Mrs. Wren, a widow with 2 young granddaughters. Marcus tied a rope around his waist and crossed the current, while Eleanor directed the men anchoring it. A section of roof broke away as he reached the children. He lifted one beneath each arm, but the return rope snagged around a fence post under the water. Eleanor entered the current with a knife between her teeth. Marcus shouted for her to go back, followed the rope beneath the surface, and cut it free. The released line snapped forward, pulling all 3 towards safety. Eleanor lost her footing. Water closed over her head, and for one terrible moment, Marcus saw only her pale hand vanish into the darkness. He thrust one child toward a tenant and plunged after her. His fingers caught the back of her gown. Together, they were dragged onto the bank, coughing and shivering, while the cottage disappeared behind them. Every tenant survived, but the western fields were lost. The mill sluice had slowed the flood, not stopped it. Marcus looked across the submerged land and understood that an order could not restore the soil, homes, livestock, and trust his signature had placed in danger. Eleanor rose unsteadily. The chapel. They returned to find Harcourt injured, Caleb unconscious, and the iron chest gone. Pritchard lay bound near the altar, abandoned by Vane. Under questioning, he finally broke. Vane took the chest through the burial passage. He said, "It opens near the old lime quarry." Eleanor knelt beside the empty pit. In the wet soil, she found a torn corner of parchment stamped with her father's wheat sheaf mark. 3 words remained visible. Crown Inquiry, Vane Ships. Her father had not hidden money beneath the chapel. He had hidden evidence linking Lord Vane to the disappearance of military supply ships during the war, the same disaster in which Marcus received the throat wound that had nearly killed him. A bell began tolling from the village. Thomas Bell raced into the chapel with worse news. Men from London have arrived. They carry a treasury order naming His Grace as Vane's partner. They say the Duke is to be arrested at dawn unless the missing records are surrendered. Eleanor looked toward the flooded quarry where Vane had fled. They had less than 4 hours to recover the chest, save Blackthorne's remaining estates, and prove that the husband who had condemned her was now being destroyed by the same forged seal. The Treasury officers gave Marcus until the first light of dawn. Their leader, Colonel Avery, would not accept the Duke's title as protection, nor Harcourt's account as sufficient evidence. The order from London contained copies of shipping contracts bearing Marcus's name and authentic seal. According to them, Blackthorne had guaranteed 3 vessels that disappeared with food and medicine intended for wounded soldiers. "One of those vessels carried my regiment," Marcus said. His damaged voice was scarcely audible. "I was aboard when it was attacked." Avery's expression did not change. "Then either you were betrayed, Your Grace, or you sacrificed your own men to conceal your involvement. Bring me the original records, and I will determine which." Eleanor examined the contract copies beneath the lantern. The seal was convincing, yet the dates carried the same flaw she had noticed in the letters accusing her. Each document had been produced on the final Friday of a month. Marcus had spent those Fridays at Blackthorne's military hospital, receiving treatment for his throat. His physician's attendance book could prove it, but only if the entries remained intact. "Julian had access to your medical correspondence. When you gave him control over my letters, he also began carrying sealed packets between Blackthorne and London. He learned precisely when you could not have signed anything." Marcus looked toward Julian, who was now bound inside the chapel under guard. "He studied my absences because I gave him the means." "Yes," Eleanor answered. She would not soften the truth simply because it wounded him. Colonel Avery allowed them 2 hours to search the quarry, but ordered a treasury officer to accompany them. Eleanor refused Marcus's offer of Blackthorne servants. "Vane will expect your men and recognize them. I will take Thomas, Caleb, and 2 Willowmere tenants who know the old passages." Willowmere had become her only secure base. Its people followed her because she had protected them, not because she carried a title. Before leaving, she placed the rent book, quarry token, brass plate, and Harcourt's written inventory inside the false compartment of the iron office chest. Caleb sealed it with his own mark. Harcourt added a second strip of wax, and Thomas witnessed both. "If we do not return," Eleanor said, "deliver this chest directly to the independent trustees at dawn." Marcus watched her establish a chain of custody more carefully than he had examined the evidence used to destroy her. "And the letters in my archive? Harcourt will inspect them with Avery. You will not touch them." Marcus accepted the restriction. "What do you require of me?" "Your physician's attendance book, the name of every servant who handled your seal, and the truth about the night your ship was attacked." His face tightened. He had spoken of that night to no one, not even during the first tender year of their marriage. "Vane's vessel was supposed to escort us," he said. "It vanished before the attack. I believed the captain deserted. Your father later wrote, asking whether our supply route had been changed. I never answered. Why? Because the Admiralty warned me that discussing the loss might end my appointment. I chose my career." The pattern was painfully familiar. Marcus had repeatedly mistaken silence for strength and convenience for duty. Eleanor turned away. "Then your silence protected Vane long before it protected Julian." They entered the quarry through a narrow cart road above the floodline. Fresh wheel tracks cut through the mud, but they ended near an abandoned lime kiln. Eleanor studied the ground. The iron chest was too heavy to carry far, yet no tracks continued toward the main road. Thomas discovered violet wax on a broken branch beside the kiln. Caleb found clay on the stone threshold, although the surrounding soil was chalk. "The clay came from beneath the chapel," Eleanor said. "The chest passed through here." Inside the kiln, she noticed that one section of wall lacked soot. The stones had been moved recently. Marcus and the tenants pulled them aside, revealing a tunnel descending toward the river. They found Vane's discarded lantern, strips of wet parchment, and the iron chest lying open beside an underground channel. Most of its contents had been burned. Eleanor knelt among the ashes and forced herself not to despair. Vane had destroyed ledgers, letters, and sworn statements, leaving only melted seals and blackened scraps. "We are too late," Marcus said. "No." Eleanor touched one surviving fragment. Fire had curled its edges, but the center remained damp. The chest had been submerged briefly during its passage through the flooded tunnel. Papers stored against its lower wall absorbed water and resisted the flames. She lifted them carefully with a flat piece of slate. One was a list of ships, false cargo weights, and payments made to initials L, of Dark. Another bore her father's handwriting and described a meeting with a dock clerk who saw Vane's men unload military medicine before the vessel sailed. At the bottom was the clerk's name, Samuel Rook. Caleb made the sign of the cross. "Rook lives near the Eastern Toll Bridge. He lost one leg at sea and repairs fishing nets." Eleanor remembered him. Her father had arranged a cottage and pension for the man 20 years earlier. What she had assumed was charity had actually been protection for a witness. "We need him before Vane discovers he is named here." A noise echoed deeper within the tunnel. Marcus drew his pistol, but an old man emerged with a crutch raised above his shoulder. Samuel Rook had been hiding in a ventilation chamber since Vane's men arrived. He recognized Eleanor immediately. "Your father said you would come if the chest was ever opened." Rook carried a brass tally disc, bearing the number of Vane's warehouse and half of a naval loading receipt. The other half, he explained, had been sealed in the chest. Matching torn edges and tally numbers would prove that Vane diverted the cargo. "I watched them unload 6 wagons of medicine," Rook said. "Sir William Ashcombe took my statement, but Vane threatened my daughter. We hid the evidence until a magistrate could protect us. Harcourt promised that protection, but Eleanor insisted the testimony be written immediately and witnessed by Avery's officer." Rook signed with a shaking hand. For the first time, they possessed a living witness, a physical token, and records preserved by a known chain of custody. Marcus stared at the names of soldiers who died after the missing medicines failed to arrive. "I called your father a meddling merchant when he questioned the shipping accounts," he said. "He was trying to show me who betrayed my men." Eleanor gathered the wet fragments. "And I spent 3 years repairing the military pensions Vane underpaid through your estates. You praised Julian for balancing the accounts because he concealed the cost beneath Willowmere. Marcus closed his eyes. He had stripped Eleanor of credit for the work that protected the widows of his own soldiers. There is no apology large enough for what I made of your life. Then do not offer one as payment, she said. Tell the truth when it costs you. Restore what you allowed Julian to take, and expect nothing from me afterward. Those are your terms. Those are the minimum. Marcus bowed his head. I accept them. Dawn's first grey line appeared at the tunnel opening. Thomas was sent ahead with Rook and the written statement, while Eleanor, Marcus, and Harcourt carried the surviving documents. They had nearly reached the quarry road when a shot struck the Treasury officer in the shoulder. Vane's men emerged from behind the kiln. Lord Vane seized Rook, tore the statement from Thomas's hands, and held it over a lantern. You should have remained beneath your mother's roof, he told Eleanor. The paper caught fire. Another man ripped away the packet of damp documents and threw it into the flooded quarry. Rook's brass tally disc disappeared with them. In less than a minute, the witness was captive, the written testimony was ash, and the physical evidence had sunk beyond reach. Vane mounted his horse and dragged Rook onto a second saddle. Come to the Blackthorne creditors' hearing at dawn, he called. You may watch the Duke lose his estates and hear your mother testify that you forged every document yourself. The creditors' hearing began as the sun rose over Blackthorne Hall. Lord Vane had chosen the Duke's own ballroom for the proceeding, filling it with bankers, land agents, treasury officers, magistrates, and tenants from both estates. The same room in which Marcus had condemned Eleanor 6 months earlier was now prepared for his ruin. At the front stood a long table covered with loan agreements, shipping contracts, and orders bearing the Blackthorne seal. Vane entered with Samuel Rook under guard and Lady Ashcombe walking beside him. Eleanor's mother wore a dark cloak fastened tightly around her throat. Her eyes found her daughter's, then dropped at once. Julian was brought in under Harcourt's custody, but he smiled when he saw Vane. Whatever disagreement had existed between them had vanished beneath their shared need to destroy Eleanor. Colonel Avery opened the hearing. The Treasury alleges that Marcus Vale, Duke of Blackthorne, guaranteed fraudulent shipping contracts, diverted military supplies, and pledged private estates against concealed debts. His Grace has until the conclusion of this hearing to answer. Vane laid Marcus's signed power of attorney upon the table. The Duke cannot deny the authority he granted Sir Julian, nor can Lady Blackthorne deny that she administered Willowmere when its funds disappeared. He presented the cancelled drainage invoices and the 6 pages torn from the rent book. Each now bore added entries, implying that Eleanor had withdrawn the missing £500 herself. Those figures were not present when we recovered the pages, Eleanor said. Can you prove that? Vane asked. The documents had been taken before Harcourt completed his inventory. Her word and Caleb's were all that remained. Vane called Lady Ashcombe first. She testified in a trembling voice that Eleanor had kept brass plates, practiced copying Marcus's signature, and threatened to accuse Julian if he refused to help her seize Willowmere. Eleanor listened without interrupting. Beneath her mother's cloak, a narrow cord pulled tightly against her neck. Vane's men had fastened something around it, hidden from the room. Her mother was not speaking freely, yet exposing the coercion too soon might place her in greater danger. Samuel Rook was brought forward next. One side of his face was swollen. Did you witness Lord Vane remove military cargo from the missing ships? Avery asked. Rook looked toward Eleanor, anguish filling his eyes. No, sir. I invented the story for money promised by Lady Blackthorne. A murmur spread through the ballroom. Vane produced the ashes of Rook's written statement and declared them evidence of Eleanor's attempt to destroy a failed deception. The lie was clever because it transformed every lost proof into proof against her. Marcus stood when Avery invited his answer. He could have denied the hidden clause, blamed Julian, and protected his title by claiming complete ignorance. Instead, he faced the tenants, officers, and creditors. The signature upon the power of attorney is mine, he said. His damaged throat forced each word into a painful rasp. I signed it without reading every clause. Lady Blackthorne warned me that her brother sought control of Willowmere. I refused to investigate because I feared political scandal. I also received letters accusing her of adultery. She challenged their dates, paper, handwriting, and seal. I chose not to examine them. Shock moved through the room. Marcus continued, even as his solicitor tried to stop him. I expelled my lawful wife, dismissed those who defended her, and gave Julian Ashcombe the authority he used to isolate and impoverish her. If the law holds me liable for the debts created beneath that authority, I will surrender my private farms and parliamentary office. But I will not permit my wife to bear responsibility for a choice that was mine. The admission cost him immediately. 2 political allies left the ballroom. A banker withdrew his offer to extend Blackthorne's credit. Avery ordered Marcus's parliamentary commission suspended pending inquiry. Vane smiled because the Duke had confirmed the validity of the instrument upon which the fraudulent loans depended. Eleanor understood the sacrifice, but it could not restore the evidence or erase what Marcus had done to her. Truth spoken late was necessary. It was not absolution. Vane presented the forged adultery letters from Marcus's cabinet. Harcourt had examined them, but without the quarry records or Rook's truthful testimony, he could establish only suspicion. The wax matched the brass plate found beneath Julian's desk, yet Julian claimed Eleanor had hidden it there. Then Vane revealed his final weapon, a letter supposedly written by Eleanor to her father before their marriage, proposing that she use Marcus's seal to gain access to military accounts. It bore her wheat sheaf mark and appeared to be 15 years old. Avery read it in silence. Lady Blackthorne, can you disprove this? Eleanor took the letter. The handwriting resembled hers at 17. The paper came from Willowmere. The wheat sheaf was drawn in the same brown ink she had used since childhood. For one terrible moment, she had no answer. Vane had gained access to her father's archive through Julian and constructed the letter from genuine materials. No, she said at last. Not yet. Avery ordered Eleanor placed under temporary arrest alongside Marcus. The creditors voted to recognize Vane's claim over the 3 Blackthorne farms until the Treasury investigation concluded. Willowmere's independent trustees, frightened by the accusations, postponed accepting control. Everything Vane required had been achieved. Eleanor discredited, Marcus stripped of office, the estates frozen, and the surviving witness publicly broken. As the constable approached her, Eleanor looked again at the forged childhood letter. Violet wax sealed its fold, carrying the familiar scent of cloves. She had assumed the cloves were added merely to disguise the smell of heated wax. Now she remembered her father's lesson about the quarry tokens. Certain merchants mixed scent into wax to identify a warehouse when dock workers could not read. Violet wax with cloves belonged to Vane's warehouse. That detail alone was suggestive, not decisive. But the letter contained something stranger. It referred to her father's hidden chest as being beneath the chapel floor. Until tonight, Vane's men had searched the chapel because they knew the location. Yet, according to his own story, he had never seen the chest, never entered the tunnel, and knew nothing about the missing evidence. The forged letter revealed knowledge only the thief could possess. Eleanor folded it carefully and handed it back. I will not resist arrest, she said. Vane's smile widened. A wise decision. But before the estates are transferred, every disputed document must be read publicly and authenticated at the Willowmere Trustees' Assembly. Avery considered the request. Because the trust became independent that morning, its trustees possessed the right to examine any instrument affecting its property. He ordered the assembly to begin at noon. Eleanor allowed the constable to close the restraint around her wrist. Across the room, Marcus recognized the calm that had entered her face. She had not surrendered. She had found the contradiction she needed. As they were led from the ballroom, she whispered to Harcourt, "Place the forged childhood letter beside a blank sheet of old Willowmere paper. Warm both near the fire, but do not break the seals." "What will that prove?" he asked. Eleanor looked back at Lord Vane. "It will force him to explain how a 15-year-old letter contains a warehouse mark he did not begin using until 8 years later." At noon, the Willowmere trustees assembled inside the village chapel, while floodwater still covered the western fields. Eleanor had insisted upon that location because every person whose future depended upon the trust could attend. Tenants crowded the rear pews, Blackthorne servants stood along the walls, and the creditors occupied the front rows. Colonel Avery presided beside Harcourt. Marcus remained under Treasury guard, stripped of his parliamentary commission, but not yet charged. Eleanor entered with one wrist restrained and took her place at the long table without looking toward her husband. Lord Vane arrived last, accompanied by Julian and Lady Ashcombe. Samuel Rook was nowhere to be seen. Before any document is examined, Eleanor said, I request protection for 2 witnesses being held under threat. Vane leaned back with practiced amusement. Another dramatic invention. Eleanor turned toward her mother. The cord beneath your cloak. Show it to the magistrate. Lady Ashcombe froze. Julian whispered something that made her flinch. Harcourt ordered a female servant to assist her. Beneath the cloak, they found a narrow wire looped around Lady Ashcombe's throat and connected to a sealed packet against her back. A note warned that if she changed her testimony, Samuel Rook would be killed, and the packet would be described as proof she helped forge the letters. Harcourt cut the wire. Lady Ashcombe collapsed into a chair. Julian told me Eleanor would be imprisoned if I refused, she cried. He forced me to say she practiced the Duke's signature. I saw him using the brass plate. Lord Vane brought the violet wax. Julian shouted that she was confused, but Eleanor did not allow the hearing to become a contest of accusations. My mother's testimony proves coercion, not the entire scheme. We will proceed through objects, dates, and access. Harcourt placed the brass printing plate on the table. Beside it, he laid Marcus's authentic seal, the false adultery letters, the eviction orders, the shipping contracts, and the childhood letter Vane had presented that morning. Eleanor asked him to describe where each item had been found and who had handled it. He read from his written inventory. The brass plate had been recovered beneath Julian's desk. The rent book and quarry token had been sealed inside the Willowmere office chest before the quarry search. The false letters had remained inside Marcus's archive cabinet from the night Eleanor was expelled until Harcourt opened it with Marcus's key. Every disputed document bears an impression made from the same design, Eleanor said, but a copied seal is never perfectly identical to the original. She asked Harcourt to enlarge the impressions using a sheet of thin paper rubbed with charcoal. The authentic seal showed a tiny break in the lion's tail, caused by damage Marcus remembered occurring during his military service. The impressions on the adultery letters lacked that break. They had been made from a plate copied before the authentic seal was damaged. The plate beneath Julian's desk also lacks the break, Harcourt confirmed. Julian protested that Eleanor could have commissioned it years earlier. Then we examine when it was used, she replied. 2 sheets lay near the chapel brazier, the forged childhood letter and blank Willowmere paper of genuine age. Harcourt had warmed both according to her instructions. A faint brown stain had appeared around the violet seal on the forged letter, while the blank sheet remained unchanged. Eleanor explained that clove oil had separated from the wax under heat and entered the fibers. Vane's warehouse used scented wax, so dock workers could distinguish his packets from those of other merchants. Many men use clove wax, Vane said. Not 15 years ago, Eleanor answered. She produced county customs records recovered from the Willowmere rent sack. Vane had registered violet clove wax as his warehouse mark 8 years earlier, after repeated cargo disputes. The letter you claim I wrote at 17 bears a commercial mark that did not yet exist. Vane changed his argument immediately. Then the seal may have been added later for storage. By whom? Your father, perhaps. My father was dead 3 years before you registered that wax. The tenants began murmuring. Eleanor raised a hand, and the chapel quieted. The letter also states that my father's evidence was hidden beneath this floor. Lord Vane claimed this morning that he knew nothing of the chest, yet his own forged letter contains its exact location. You could have added those words. Then explain why your men blasted the embankment and entered the burial passage before I ever saw the letter. Vane's confidence began to fracture. He claimed the flood had been an accident, and Pritchard acted without instruction. Harcourt brought Pritchard forward in chains. The agent tried to protect Vane until Eleanor placed the quarry token before him. This was found among Willowmere's rent receipts, she said. Its scratched initials show Julian collected the refunded drainage payment. The quarry ledger will show who purchased blasting powder on the same day. Pritchard looked toward Vane, expecting reassurance. Vane, instead, called him a common thief. That contempt broke the last of his loyalty. Lord Vane ordered the bank opened, Pritchard said. He said the flood would clear the cottages, conceal the digging, and make Lady Blackthorne appear responsible for neglecting the repairs. Harcourt recorded every word. Eleanor then reconstructed the scheme. Julian stole Willowmere's repair money and used Marcus's authority to conceal the withdrawal. Vane diverted military cargo years earlier. while forged Blackthorne contracts protected him from inquiry. Eleanor's father discovered the fraud and hid the evidence until the trust passed to independent control. When Eleanor began questioning the accounts, Vane and Julian forged adultery letters to remove her from Blackthorne and place her property under her brother's command. Marcus's willing refusal to investigate gave them the access they needed. But the shipping proof is gone, Vane said. Rook withdrew his testimony. Burned fragments, and an injured agent cannot connect me to missing vessels. Then bring Samuel Rook here, Eleanor replied. You claimed he left Willowmere freely. If that is true, you should know where he went. Vane laughed. I am not responsible for an old sailor's movements. Eleanor looked toward Thomas Bell. The boy opened the chapel's side door. 2 treasury officers entered carrying a coil of rope cut from Vane's quarry stable. Behind them walked Samuel Rook, supported by Caleb. Thomas had followed Vane's riders after the ambush and marked the abandoned toll house where Rook was held. Harcourt's men rescued him during the creditor's hearing. Rook placed half of the naval loading receipt upon the table. Vane destroyed the matching half, he said, but not the record copied by the dockmaster. Colonel Avery produced a sealed Admiralty ledger, newly delivered from London. Its final page contained the other cargo entries from the missing ships. Vane surged to his feet. Those numbers prove nothing. Thousands of warehouse tallies use the same sequence. Eleanor set the brass tally disc's charcoal impression beside the ledger. Although the original disc had sunk in the quarry, its wet metal had left a perfect reversed mark upon one of the damp papers before Vane threw them away. Thomas had found that paper caught among reeds below the tunnel. The number, warehouse symbol, and damaged lower edge were all visible. There remains one question, Eleanor said, whether this impression came from Lord Vane's warehouse tally or from another token entirely. Colonel Avery broke the Admiralty ledger's red seal and turned to the registered warehouse marks. Everyone watched his finger move down the page until it stopped beside a violet-stained entry bearing Lord Vane's name.